Hi, this is Ben Gay, and I want to welcome you to Black Belt Selling.
Welcome to Black Belt Selling with Stephanie and Anna Scheller. I'm Anna.
And I'm Stephanie.
We're a mother-daughter team who are passionate about helping you break through those obstacles that cause you to make fewer sales. Or actually, we want you to make more sales. What am I talking about? On Black Belt Selling, we bring guests and we bring content to help you grow your business, to become more confident, but most of all, in order to reach your goals, the reason that you're in business. You can learn more about us by going to facebook.com/groups/Black Belt Selling. There you will see people post. You will be welcomed into the group. More importantly, though, you will know when these podcasts go live. So go to Facebook.com/groups/Black Belt Selling. Today, Stephanie, we have an amazing guest. This guy is iconic when it comes to sales. Who do we have today?
We have the legendary Mr. Ben Gay III. And yes, you did hear that correctly. His name is Ben Gay III. And this guy, I gotta preface something for you guys, okay? Goes in for one of his first sales interviews. He's sitting next to this other guy. This is why we said the legendary Ben Gay III. Because he's sitting next to this other guy. They're applying for the same job. And the guy interviewed the both of them and decided to hire both of them. The other guy's name was Zig Ziglar. That is who we interviewed.
Precisely.
That's how you're going to feel it there, Si.
There you go. Woo! Not only that, he has republished the classic book, Sales Closing Power by J. Douglas Edwards. J. Douglas Edwards, a lot of the things that we hear in the sales world about scripting and about how to close came from this man. And he was a contemporary. As a matter of fact, Ben Gay learned from J. Douglas Edwards. So you're going to hear a lot of great things. We want you to listen. And then at the very end, you're going to hear some more. So stay tuned and watch or listen. Welcome to Black Belt Selling. And of course, we want to thank you, Ben Gay, not to be confused with the ointment, for joining us today. Thank you for being with us, Ben.
My pleasure.
Yeah, I gotta say, Ben, every single time I tell people that I know one of Zig Ziglar's contemporaries. I know this amazing guy. He's brilliant. He's genius. You got to check him out. He just drops such knowledge. And I'm always like, his name's Ben Gay III, and everyone goes, what? And I'm like, no, really? Like, they all think I'm pulling their legs. It's awesome.
Whenever I introduce myself, I say I'm Ben Gay, and I can tell by the look on their face they don't think they heard it right. They'll call me Ned or Dan, or it can't be Ben Gay. And when I see that pause, I stick my left arm out, rub it with this arm, and say, just like the back rub. Now they believe they've heard it. As I think I've told you, I use it when I open talks. I say, let's get this Ben Gay thing out of the way first. And they usually crack up. And then I go into a thing about I'm Ben Gay III. And I've had a lot of grief with that. It's also been the best thing that ever happened to me, but I've had a lot of grief with that. And so we had to debate, what do we name our first son? And we went back and forth. And finally, we decided we couldn't do it to him. So we named him Absorbing Junior.
Oh, well, that was...
Stephanie, do you know what that is?
Yeah. Stephanie may not. Yeah. You have to be, I'm discovering with crowds, if I see a lot of young faces, I don't get the laugh I used to get. But I went in our drugstore the other day, and it's still there on the bottom shelf, I'll grant you, but it's still there. So I may start carrying a bottle of Absorbing Junior with me and then hold it up to make sure you have a visual prop to help them get the answer. And then in the Coast Guard, in the military, last name first, first name last, I was, of course, for 6 years at mail call, Gay Ben.
Oh, no.
Yeah. Well, way back then, Stephanie,
I know, that was actually a big deal in the military.
You know, gay meant something else, okay?
Meant happy.
It meant happy. It
Yeah,
does not have the
I was
rainbow.
thinking of the don't ask, don't tell thing that isn't around anymore.
and Bengay wasn't even spelled my way. It was spelled Bengue, Benjou, named after the inventor, Dr. Benjou, a French doctor. But they couldn't get Americans to say Benjou. Americans would look at it and say Bengay. And so finally they gave up and changed over to my spelling. In 1960, my senior year in high school, my life changed.
For sure, for sure, for sure. Well, it is always wonderful to have you because, well, I mean, simply because you're just a wealth of knowledge and you've been so successful. But I know that your roots go back probably while I was still going to grade school. And you and Zig, you both went to the same place to get your training. And J. Douglas Edwards kind of comes into that picture somehow.
He does. J. Douglas Edwards was my first sales trainer. I could safely say everything I knew about selling in the first 2 years I learned from J. Douglas Edwards. And this is the book I wrote for him after he died, Sales Closing Power by J. Douglas Edwards. Inside, we say that I really did it, but it's true to his seminar teaching and to the personal notes I took when I was with him. So when Zig already had a personality, but he was a little short on sales training, I was the same way to a lesser degree. I didn't have his personality, but we were both a little short on the training area. Formal training, Zig was one of those naturals who, you know, came out of his mother's womb looking for a pot or a pan to sell to somebody. And so, but yeah, September 15th, 1965, a Wednesday at noon, Zig and I had answered the same ad. We thought it was a employment ad. It turned out it was a business opportunity ad. And what we were going to was a business opportunity meeting, not a strict interview. So we both fell for that, but that's all right. It worked out well for both of us. So Bill Dempsey had run the ad, conducted the meeting, and Zig and I each put, and my buddy and business partner, James H. Rucker Jr., Jimmy Rucker, the greatest salesman I ever worked with, we put up our $91.42, walked up a little ramp, door slammed behind us, and the rocket took off.
Aha.
And I didn't know we were on a rocket till it had launched.
A great way to phrase it. I think some of the most successful people in the world end up doing the exact same thing. They see the opportunity, they take it, and all of a sudden they're going, whoa.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So-
it was like having Stephanie as a daughter. Whoa, what happened?
So bringing it back to sales here, how did J. Douglas Edwards come into the picture? How did you connect with him?
I won a little sales contest in Atlanta just about the time I learned the scripts and actually started doing something. The first 6 months was wasted because I was going to just do it on personality without learning any scripts or anything. And finally, Bill Dempsey asked me not to come to the meetings anymore because I was depressing people. I never showed up with anybody, but because I was there every night, people would call me over to help with their prospects, which I couldn't do because I hadn't learned that script. I couldn't get the meeting. And one night stopped me when I came in. He said, "Ben, I appreciate if you wouldn't come back to the meetings anymore." Well, by that time, Jimmy and I had $5,000 invested in it in 1965 dollars, about $50,000 today. I couldn't afford not to come to the meetings. So I learned the scripts. There was a contest almost immediately afterwards. First prize, and I describe it in Sales Closing Power, first prize was a trip to Miami, Florida, to an American Sales Masters convention. That was a company that used to put on big rallies before anybody else was doing anything like that and have in a bunch of speakers and so on. So I got to go to American Sales Masters convention, sit on the front row, listen to all of them, and have a private dinner with J. Douglas Edwards. And when we walked into the dining room of the hotel, I think he'd already spoken, but he was well known anyway. We walked into the dining room and I heard somebody whisper, "That's J. Douglas Edwards." And the whole room, because it was filled with people who were attending the convention, the whole room stood and gave him a standing ovation. And I thought,
Wow.
wow, there's a little goal for you. And in the book, I tell about a time when it happened to me a few years later, almost exactly the same. But anyway, we sat down, and the waiter came over. I just learned the other night they're now called servers, but at the time they were waiters.
Right.
Waiter came over and said, "How can I help you?" And Doug handed him a $100 bill, about $1,000 today, handed him a $100 bill and said, "We're just going to need water," which wasn't what I had in mind. I thought I was going to get a free dinner. He said, "We're just going to need water. This young man tells me he wants to learn how to sell." And he gave me a one-on-one, face-to-face, nose-to-nose sales training meeting for, I don't know, 2, 3, 4 hours until we heard the vacuum cleaners running. You know, that sound if you've stayed in a nightclub too long or a restaurant too long. The vacuum cleaners were running. I looked around, with the only two still sitting at a table.
Yeah.
And he shook my hand and said, "Well, good luck." And less than a year later, he was working for me. I had become president of the company, and hired him on a regular basis. So the worm turned, but it was due primarily to him. It isn't everything I know about selling now, not by a long shot, but it was sort of the kindergarten, first and second grade of selling. And people my age were trained by Doug Edwards, or the people that trained them were. There were just a few people around who knew anything about selling. Elmer Wheeler, who we'll talk about in a minute if I think Anna said she wanted to discuss something he did. But Elmer Wheeler, Fred Herman from Cedartown, Georgia, became a good friend of mine. J. Douglas, of course, and everybody else was sort of a humorist. Cavett Robert, one of the great speakers of all time, who we all loved. It was his idea, but I was one of the first 12 members of the National Speakers Association. He started that and so on. But if you really take a hard look at Cavett, when you listen to his recordings, he was a humorist. They could have worked in nightclubs. They were stand-ups, and had funny stories that had something to do with selling. If they were speaking to a dental association, they told funny stories that had something to do with dentistry. But that was the foundation. Jimmy Rucker, my partner, and as I said, the greatest salesman I ever worked with, said the other day on Facebook that he gave me some credit because I was sort of the go-getter in the beginning, and he gave my father some credit because Dad was the one that talked us into selling, and for him for a while. And but Rucker said, frankly, much to my surprise, I didn't realize Doug had that big an impact on him. He said, I would not have been in selling. He's retired now. I would not have been in selling were it not for J. Douglas Edwards. So that was the impact he had on people like us. We just thought, like Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman, a good handshake, shine shoes, and a personality, and you were off and running. Well, that's not true, as anyone of us who've done well in selling now know. But Doug was the first one to break that to me.
Wow.
It's interesting because a lot of what you learn in the books, and they're so valuable still. I was working with a coaching client just a couple of days ago. He's like, "How do I get referrals?" And I said, "Well, I'll tell you what." I took this straight out of J. Douglas Edwards' book. I said, if you go to somebody and say, "Hey, do you know anybody that could use my services?" They'll go, "I can't think of anybody right now." So what you do is you have a list of five professions that people normally use. I said, so let's come up with a list of those. And we did. And I said, okay, now when you go to people and ask for referrals, you're going to ask them, do you have a banker? Do you have a this? Do you have a that? Do you work with this person? Do you think they'd mind if I called and used your name? And they're like, and I'm just thinking that came straight out of J. Douglas Edwards' book, Sales Closing Power, the one that you held up. And they're so, scripting is so very valuable. But there's so much emphasis right now on relationships. You've got to build the relationships first. Does that negate scripting, or does that work hand in hand? How does that work with scripting?
Scripting is the effective way to present something after testing and trying. It has nothing to, I believe in relationships. I don't believe in scripting. Like, I hope they don't go to movies or watch television or anything, since everything they see there, and they believe John Wayne is their close personal friend, everything they see there is scripted, or the actor doesn't work anymore. It's scripted and tested. It has nothing. That's like, I'm allergic to oranges, so I'm not going to eat pineapples. It has nothing to do with, of course you build relationships. Funny you should mention that particular thing, at the risk of looking like someone who's hawking books. This is the Closer's Part 2. The last chapter in the Closer's Part 2 is the best thing ever written about selling by me or anybody else. It starts on page 257. It's called Sales Infiltration. And sales infiltration is about building relationships quickly. Most sales are made or lost in the first 10 to 15 seconds. They can be saved shortly thereafter in a good relationship building thing as described in Sales Infiltration. The reason I brought that up at this moment is back to Doug Edwards. The gentleman that chapter is written about, an old friend of mine, passed away now, sold home gifts. I'm not sure what you would call it. He's the guy who sells you things you really don't need, but they're pretty, and or you give them to the brides and she doesn't really need them either, but they're pretty, that type of stuff. And he used to tell the story of, he went to a seminar with J. Douglas Edwards, might have been in Miami with me. I don't know how many people I was sitting in the room with who later were major factors in my life. But he went to a Doug Edwards seminar, and Doug Edwards told the referral thing that you're talking about, how you get them to come up with referrals, that you should never leave an appointment without 5 referrals at least, more if you can get them. And one of the great things to leave with is their church directory. If they're active in their church, they hand you that or lend it to you for a day, and you promise to photocopy it and return them to you. You've just picked up 1,000 or 2,000 or whatever referrals. So he said, I was so stupid when I attended that first Doug Edwards thing. And he said, never call on anybody that you don't get 5 referrals. He said, I made one cold call, knocked on a door, made an appointment, came back the next day, and so on. He said, I was scared to death. It's the only cold call I ever made. And he said, but I got 5 referrals, made a sale and got 5 referrals. And then the Closer's Part 2, we go into details about how he explains it to a family and how he's not there, just there for a one-shot thing and so on. And then he asked for the referrals, and he said, I got 5 referrals, I think, 5, 6, 7, whatever. He said, I got 5 or so, I think. And I went and called on those people. And from here, I'm making up numbers now, but from here I got 10 referrals, and from here I got 3, and from there I got 6, and so on. And then I called on them and got their referrals. And the referrals get easier, by the way, in a circle of influence, because once you've been referred around in the circle and you get referred to somebody, they go, oh yeah, I've heard of Ben Gay. Yeah, let me talk to him. Versus it might be a little colder the first time you got referred, or the first time they've heard your name. But anyway, he was in the industry for 40 years. And because he was stupid and did what Doug told him to do, he made one cold call his entire career that first night. Wow. Every call he made for 40 years thereafter, you could trace back to through the family tree to that first call. And wow. you could trace that back to Doug Edwards telling him, get 5 referrals. So that's how powerful it can be. And now with the internet and social media and all, it just gets easier and easier and easier. I keep hearing things that Zig and I have said, or Tom Hopkins or Doug or anybody, as old school. There's nothing new about new selling, whatever that is, except getting the prospects is easier. You can far more, but once you come in contact with a prospect, whether it's by email or text or Facebook or knocking on their door or whatever, once you've made contact, either in written or spoken words, you have to build a relationship and sell them. That part, nothing has changed since the Yankee peddler. He or she rode around on a mule, then got upscale to a horse, which went a little faster. Then they got a wagon. Then we got cars. Then we got telephones. And so I kick in at about the car and telephone level. I never rode around on a mule making sales calls. But everything since then is the same. Once I get in contact with you, my job is to build a friendship quickly. It can strengthen over time, but to build a friendship and trust relationship, and to lay out the ground rules, which in sales infiltration I explain. People say, you know, I keep running into this objection, and if I respond at all on Facebook or whatever, I say that's because you're not a sales infiltrator. Read the closers part 2. We don't have those objections because I bring all that up front. This is also a Doug Edwards thing. I wasn't thinking about him when I wrote it, but we bring all that stuff up front. You can't say to me, I want to think it over at the end of an hour-long presentation, because we already cleared up in the first 5-6 minutes. You're not going to do that to me.
Right.
You know, you can say no, you know, but you'll die a slow death in selling on maybes and be backs, and I want to think it over and so on.
I got to talk to mine.
I give you my presentation. I want a yes or no. But I also know how to maneuver you into that position so that it will be, with unbelievable accuracy, 86% in my case, it'll be a yes. But like lawyers learn their first day in law school, I don't ask a closing question. They just say a question. I don't ask a question to which I don't already know the answer. Or, you know, or I wouldn't have asked you.
Speaking of lawyers, I've been meaning to ask you this, Ben. We did an interview with you. You were one of our first 20, 30 interviews with Black Belt Selling.
First 10. Oh, yeah, he was one of
the... And one thing you said stuck with, like, seriously, is stuck with me. And you said the only difference, and it's actually on my board, the only difference between a salesman and a conman, and I bring this up because the lawyers, you know, the connection.
Sure. Yeah, con men and lawyers is being redundant.
Right, exactly. Segue here. But you said the only difference between a salesman and a conman is the belief in their products. Could you kind of dropped that nugget bomb, and then we moved on, you know, way back then. Could you maybe elaborate a little bit on this one? Because I've used it 100 times. It's one of my favorite quotes ever.
Well, thank you. And credit again, this is like a J. Douglas Edwards tribute show. Normally I don't talk about him that much, but Doug Edwards said one day, either over lunch or in a seminar or somewhere, sometimes I blend things together because I don't remember how they happened. As somebody said, well, you said Dr. Hill said so-and-so, but when he talked to me, or I heard him talk, he said this. I said, I'm really sorry. 52 years ago, when I first sat down with him, I didn't know I was going to be questioned so closely. I should have recorded it and had a court reporter with us for all these meetings. But somewhere, Doug Edwards said to me, casually from the stage or whatever, the only difference between a salesman and a con man is belief in product. And I really wrestled with that. It was like I used to have arguments with Dr. Hill about whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve. And I said, unless he's crazy. And Hill was eating, Dr. Hill was eating, and he put his fork down and said, what? No one had ever questioned him on that. I said, unless he's crazy. The insane asylums are filled with people who can conceive and believe and so on. It just can't be done. So we argued and debated in a friendly manner, and finally we agreed if he ever rewrote the book or rewrote that sentence, he would put dash, unless he's crazy.
And are you talking about Napoleon Hill, the author of Think and Grow Rich?
Yeah, and so
I had to check. You dropped the name so casually, so.
Well, Dr. Hill worked for me for the last 2.5 years of his life. He was my mentor and friend, a gift to me on my 26th or something like that birthday. William Penpatrick, the owner of the company I was running, brought him to my office, introduced me, and gave him to me as a gift, already paid. He was sort of gift wrapped with a bow around his head. And he said, I know from time to time you'll be afraid to ask me things or whatever. Pardon me 1 second. I'm going to make a quick note so we don't forget what we started talking about before.
Right, the con man. We'll come back to it. I just had to, because this is like a living legend here.
Yeah. We are learning. I mean, we didn't even know this about, we just need to keep asking Ben questions, and we'll just keep learning more and more.
It's going to be a 3-hour
double back around to Dr. Hill, when we're done, because I got some exciting news in that regard. Anyway, so Dr. Hill and I continued to debate it and so on, and finally it was whatever the mind of man can conceive and believe it can achieve dash unless he's crazy. To reach goals, they must be specific, measurable, and attainable. And so that, to me, is the complete thought. Whatever the mind of man, as long as he's not crazy, and as long as the goals are specific, measurable, and attainable. And he and I shook hands and agreed that's the way we would describe it from that point on. Whether we went back and wrote another version of the book, I don't know. Okay, so that's arguing with Dr. Hill. When I was a young punk, arguing with people was part of my specialty. So that's arguing with Dr. Hill. Back to arguing with Doug Edwards.
Yes.
I sort of took it personally because I considered myself a salesman and I didn't want to be considered a con man. But he went on to explain over several lunches or dinners that the con man comes from the word confidence man. Con man is just shorthand for a confidence man. And he said, what is a confidence man? Well, I'd never heard that term other than con man, but I figured it out on my own. You win the confidence of people and get them to like you and trust you, and then you turn over your money. What makes it a con is if it's a useless snake oil product versus some sort of, versus Bengay, the rub-on product that is miraculous, I'm told. I haven't used it in years, but I'm told it's miraculous. I do have my Bengay Take to Seminars tube right here that I hold up when I do the Bengay jokes. And I thought, oh, I get it now. The technique is the same, not unlike a gun. You can use a gun to defend your family, or hunt deer to feed them, or for sport. Or you can use a gun to shoot up a school. The gun isn't the problem, it's the person. The techniques of selling are not the problem. It's the honesty and authenticity. God, I got the word right. I'm so proud of myself. Authenticity of the person doing the selling. So Doug was right. It took me a while to dope it out, but he was right. It maybe wasn't artfully phrased, but he was right in that the only difference between a salesman and a con man is belief in product.
Now, you know, when we were, so for our listening audience, and you'll be watching this on YouTube, this is actually a take two of a previous interview, which the minute Ben heard it, he contacted me and he said, take that thing down. We can't have that. Well, he wasn't quite that way, but.
I sound bad enough without bad audio. So I need all the help I can get.
So we wanted to recapture some of that. So yes, the con man was one of the important ones. The other one we wanted to talk revisit was the fourth man perspective. And I think that's really important because in the industry of sales, it can be so common. It's so easy to just think about one perspective, and that is the perspective that gets me to the commission. But talk about that fourth wall perspective and how valuable that is in sales, especially today.
Well, it's a theater term. When you go to a play, for instance, there are four walls. Everybody's aware of three of them: stage left, audience left, stage right, whatever, right, left, and the back wall, whatever that is, whatever the scenery is. The fourth wall is where the audience sits. They are, to a person on stage, the fourth wall. They look out and see, you know, if it's a big enough crowd. When I talk to 10,000 people, it always reminds me of an oil painting. There's very little interaction. You don't want to play just to the front row. You play to the middle distance and act like you can see the people in the balconies and so on. So that's your perspective. The fourth wall is their perspective looking at you. And you need to be aware of that. I'll give you a practical example. When I teach public speaking, and I've taught it off and on for over 50 years, taught it in 2 prisons, taught it to dozens and dozens and dozens of audiences over the years. All the hard work I used to do to get people to don't do this, you're sticking your finger in your ear, don't do that, and so on, ended when I figured out the secret of videotaping presentations. because when somebody sees themselves not handling things right, they clear it up like that. I quit smoking. I was a 3-pack a day smoker. I quit smoking 40 years ago because I did a seminar in New York back in the days when audiences on the tables in front of them, there was a water pitcher every 2 or 3 people, a glass in front of everybody, and an ashtray about every other person, and the audience would smoke if they were so inclined. And if it was a seminar where you were going to be up there for a while and you smoked as the speaker, you smoked. And so that's funny, isn't it, to you? Yeah. Everybody did. Everybody did, if they already smoked, and everybody else suffered because secondhand smoke.
Right.
Everyone in the audience smoked, however unwilling. But I don't remember anybody ever complaining about it. That was just life the way it was.
It was, yeah, I remember.
Yeah. So I come back from New York. I'm up in our training room, and on the big screen, I had it taped, as I try to do all the time. And I'm sitting up there smoking a cigarette, feet up on the desk, watching me. And I was astounded how much time I spent. Back then I wore only black, still only wear black, but it's 3-piece black suit and, you know, black tie and so on. I sort of looked like Zorro's best friend. And I was amazed how much time I spent brushing ashes off my suit and leaning down to pick up something, and then smoke goes up into your eye, and so you're doing the awkward blink, and then looking for a place to put the cigarette out when that time came, and so on. And so I'd forgotten what I was talking about or what I was watching me talk about, and I thought, you look like an idiot. My God. And so I took a pack of Marlboros, I think is what I smoked, or Winston's, out of my pocket, wadded it up, threw it in a trash can right near where I was sitting, and I've never smoked again. But I did it from watching myself look bad on video. And I also probably picked up something good that day, something I was doing, you know, that's effective, I'll leave that in. So I do that now with public speaking students. I say, bring your own camera, have somebody, you know, buddy up. You take his picture, he takes yours, she takes yours, etc. And because you go to the back of the room and watch yourself perform, and you'll shape up much quicker than anything I could say or do for you. I also say and do things for them, but that's the key to it. Well, fourth wall perspective is when you're set. If I'm set, for instance, right now, and I'm looking in your face, and I'm aware of that, but I'm also aware, fourth wall, of someone looking at this 2 years from now who is seeing just me on screen or just you on screen, and should I be looking right in the camera? I have a habit of looking into your eyes, which at home looks like I'm not looking where I should be looking.
Right.
When I do a television interview, I always say, first thing I say to the director when I come on board, I said, I'm your worst nightmare. I'm not going to look in the camera and pretend like I'm Ron Popeil. I'm going to look at the host, and your job is to, if you want me looking dead in the camera, put a camera directly behind the host, because that's where I'm going to be looking. I have a conversation. It's your job to make it look like I'm moving around. Earl Nightingale, I used to kid Earl. He hated public speaking, hated it. And he was charging $500 when most of us weren't charging anything. Zig and I were charging $300, but they wouldn't stop hiring him, so he raised it to $1,000. Then he raised it to $1,500. Keep in mind, this is 30, 40 years ago. So he was, in today's money, asking $10,000, $15,000, $20,000 for a talk, when the rest of us were, in today's money, asking for $3,000 at the top end, and so on. And I said, you keep raising your fee. I finally got him to grandfather us in, because we used him constantly. He worked for us as the voice of several of our companies and appeared at the sales meetings. I said, I've got to get grandfathered in. You keep jacking up your prices. Why are you doing that? Because I knew where he was working, primarily for us. And Beltone, a few other people. I said, why do you keep jacking your price up? He said, I'm trying to find that point at which people will leave me the hell alone. and, and he died without quite finding it. And I said all that to say this: if you ever watch The Strangest Secret on video, which is the audio video version of his famous 1956 record. The original is right over there in my, well, behind that backing. A 33 and a third RPM record from Columbia, the largest selling non-entertainment record in history. Yeah. That Bill Dempsey gave me that the day I joined the company and said, this might help you. Less than 2 years later, Earl was working for me. It helped. He gave me a copy of Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich. He said, read this, it can help you. And I said, thank you. 2 years later, Dr. Hill was working for me. So I used to kid both of them. They were all out the house several times, but one weekend in particular, they said, do you think our material helped you? And I said, well, look around. It's one of the bigger houses in Marin County. And we'd just gotten off a yacht, and they both worked for me. And I said, yeah, I think they helped a little bit, since I was $100 a week food broker shortly before I read the book and listened to the recording. But anyway, if you get the video of Earl, you will notice he's standing at a lectern with his hands on the lectern, and he's looking dead ahead into there were 3 cameras there that day, looking dead ahead into the middle camera. And the only way they were able to make Earl look like he was alive, and if you watch the video, you'll see it, is they would blend from one camera to the other, not just shift, but blend. You'd see him looking dead at you, and then from this, you'd see a side view phase in, and then that would be the thing, and then another side view from the other, and that would phase in. And I told him, I said, Earl, your cameramen were magnificent. They almost made you look like you were alive. And enjoying the experience, which I assure you he didn't. He was a radio guy. He sat in a booth. I got a great story about that someday for you. He would sit in his booth and cold call. You could type up something right now off the top of your head, and if Earl were alive, you could hand it to him. He'd sit down and read it perfectly. First time he ever saw it. Didn't have to read it, didn't have to study it, and he was a master at that. But speaking in public, he hated. Even appearing in public, he hated. So in fact, I don't know that he always did it, but on several occasions, as we were getting ready to put him on at one of our meetings, he would be handed by me or somebody a double bourbon. And he would, I started to say sip it, but he actually drank it. Drank it before he went on, just to steady his nerves. So
I know.
I can't hear you.
We both muted ourselves.
Now I hear you.
You know, one of the things, we don't have much time left, but one of the things that, because this is about selling, that we touched on before is that the scripting, and there was a story, I think that really, really is an important story for people to hear. And you told the story the last time about 1 egg or 2, and I think it's really powerful to help people understand how subtle changes in language can help people or help people grow their businesses. And it's not manipulation. There was nothing in the story that suggested manipulation. It was merely a subtle suggestion that nearly emptied the country or the area of eggs. Can you tell that story?
Caused a national egg shortage, and that was Elmer Wheeler, hired by F.W. Woolworth, and he's the one who gave me a love for short phrases that wrap it all up. I was telling the story of Gigi, my wife, who has a little side hustle in eBay, and I got her to, when people, let's say she's asking 100, they say 50, she used to say, how about 75 or something? And the percentage of success was not very good. And I heard it, and I heard her complaining about it one night. And I said, why don't you try this? You ask 100, they said 50, and you're willing to take 75. Say 75 and it's yours, exclamation mark. And her closing rate just skyrocketed. Virtually everybody takes it, and the rest don't argue. They just go away, and that's fine too. And then I was alluding to McDonald's just came up with one. McDonald's is slave labor, and you can't feed a family of 4 on what McDonald's is paying you. I couldn't feed a family of 4 what I made as a soda jerk when I was a kid either, but I wasn't planning on it. It was my first job, you know. So if you've seen it recently, McDonald's is now saying, McDonald's, America's best first job. It just takes everything, all the problems away. We're not saying this is a career, folks. It may be. The chairman of the board of McDonald's started flipping hamburgers, but we just take it all away. F.W. Woolworth, which was then the largest retail, most of your listeners won't even know who they were. Woolworth's Five and Dime, F.W. Woolworth. It was the largest restaurant chain in the world. Their lunch counters stretch, if you put them end to end, I forget the number, 24 miles or something like that. They sold more potatoes, more eggs, more this than any other firm on the planet. And their stores made them the largest retailer in the world at the time. So they bring in Elmer Wheeler and they said, one of the most profitable things we sell are eggs. I don't know what they charged for them. I know what they paid for them, but there was quite a spread percentage wise. And they said, can you help? And he said, eggs, okay. So he said, take me to one of your stores. Put him at the end of the store, and he sat at the end of the counter, and he just watched. People came and ordered soft-boiled eggs, hard-boiled eggs, 2 eggs, 3. Well, if you order 2 eggs, that's probably what you want, maybe a little more than you need. Probably not a way to talk them up to 3. So he says, well, I was sort of sweating bullets there, trying to figure out how to solve this. And then he saw something he didn't even know people did. People would come in and order a milkshake and say, 1 egg, please. And he watched, and they would do all the stuff you do with a milkshake, and then crack a raw egg and put it in and then stick it up under the blender. He didn't know people put eggs in milkshakes. He said he'd never heard of that. But he watched it, and about 1 out of, I'm making up numbers, 1 out of 5 asked for it without any prompting. So his secret was, and I repeat, it caused a national egg shortage when the largest restaurant chain on earth suddenly exploded their egg sales. Their counters were shaped in U's connected to each other. And that U was sort of the waitress's server now, the waitress's station, her office. And she took care of probably 8 people around. He put 24 eggs under the counter at the peak of the curve in every station. And when you ordered a milkshake, or when they suggested you get a milkshake, which he also taught them, suggestive selling, hard to turn down a milkshake. I had one yesterday. I wrote my diet I shouldn't have had, but the guy at the counter said, you want a chocolate milkshake with that? And I went, yeah, I do. So he taught him suggestive selling, but here's the most powerful thing he did. When you ordered a milkshake, the lady reached under the counter and palmed 2 eggs and held them up in front of the customer and said, 1 egg or 2. And enough people who didn't plan on getting any said 1 or maybe 2, but said 1. And enough people who were already ordering 1 from time to time ordered 2, that the nation ran out of eggs for some period of time. I'm sure they caught up rather quickly. But 1 egg or 2, that's all it was. And notice, it's not a, do you want any eggs or not? It's 1 egg or 2 eggs. It's almost a statement / question. It's not, do you want? Right. Gigi's thing of 75 and it's yours isn't a question, it's an exclamation mark. McDonald's, the best job in America, et cetera. I saved an answering, the call center industry. I began the call center industry, the 800 call center industry in 1976, and we had certain projections. And lo and behold, my projections were wrong. Far more people were leaving the service after some period of time than we had anticipated. So I sat in the control room and listened, and I thought of Elmer Wheeler the whole time I was there. Listened to, what are we saying? What are we saying? And people would call in, salespeople, to pick up their messages, traveling people, whatever, to pick up their messages. They're already beaten down. They're tired. They've been hammered about the head and shoulders all day long. And then they call their answering service, and a friendly voice says, you don't have any messages. And after about the 50th time I heard that, I said, all right, I got the problem now. How do we solve the problem? We solved the problem with, you're all clear, sir. We made the fact that no one on the planet wants to talk to you sound like good news.
And it's all just a tiny little script change.
Exactly.
Ben, you're genius. I love having you on this show. We learned so much from you every single time.
Well, thank you. That's very sweet of you. I appreciate it. I wish Gigi were here to hear that.
I'll send her a note. I'll write it. Well, Ben, this has truly been an honor to sit and chat with you and listen to you and learn from you. And even though this is our retake, I still got a whole other page worth of notes here. This was fantastic. Thank you for taking the time to chat with us.
My pleasure. Have a nice day, ladies.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I always enjoyed having Ben Gay join us. The man is full of wisdom, and he has really but he has spanned the ages in terms of, he's seen a lot when it comes to sales. You know, most of all, I think one of the things that I was very influenced by, something that he said, is that fourth wall perspective, the fourth wall perspective. Do you want to comment on that a little bit, Stephanie?
Yeah, well, what I loved about this was, and I do, like, this guy is brilliant. First of all, I can't remember if he's been on our show how many times now? This guy's just genius. I love talking
3, 4,
to Ben.
5, yeah.
Something silly like that, just because this guy's so smart. But this fourth wall perspective, I liked that, because I think that a lot of times as sales reps, we get caught up in our side of the sales process. We get caught up in writing the right script and, you know, building trust and rapport and blah, 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 all the things that we're supposed to do. And I think this fourth wall perspective kind of forces us to remember it's not about us. It's about the customer, and it's about how they're feeling and what they're thinking. And sometimes we get caught up in our side of it. So I love that, just for that perspective of remembering, hey, you know, your job is to be thinking about the other person.
Precisely. And not that you're stepping us outside of the interaction to criticize yourself, but really to see, how are you coming across, and how are you coming across to the other person? Because ultimately, especially in the sales environment that we're in these days, Stephanie, it's so important that we recognize that the customer's perspective is the one that's going to win. They're the ones that are making the decision, you know? I think the other thing I thought was extremely fascinating, and you know, we don't think that little changes make a big difference, but the story about 1 egg or 2, oh my, that was amazing. You know, people are afraid to cross-sell, and it's so simple.
Well, cross-selling, they're afraid to cross-sell because they're, you know, which is stupid, because like, you've already gotten the client. What you can't lose at that point. Why not offer them something else? You know, Cardone talks about the second sale. The second sale is easier to get than the first sale. Yep. But so I don't get why people are so scared about this whole cross-selling thing. But I really love that they sat down, they took time to figure out where did they have room to make a little improvement, and it turned into what, basically $1 billion, you know, $1 billion script that one by sitting down and taking time to figure out what little tweaks to make. Because once you reach a certain level of success, and this is the black belt concept, I think, is once you reach that certain level of success, it's the little changes that make a difference. It's changing so that your forward stance, your feet and your hands all land at the same time. That creates the power. It's not so much about getting a forward stance at that point. And that's the black belt selling. That's sitting down and what are the little things I can change that can just completely transform. But it's taking that time too. It's the small changes, but it's taking that time to really self-evaluate that I really took away as a big piece out of that story.
And I think it's important when you're looking at those little changes that can make a big difference, that you have an outsider help you see those things. You know, it's important because sometimes we can't see the forest for the trees. We can't see the picture because we're in the frame, so to speak. So it's good to have somebody else to help you and to experiment with it. You know, the one thing I do, I work with a local company here, and I've told them, I said, everybody that will ask me for a bag to sell, to buy a bag of cookies, I will buy them. Do you know how many people ask me for cookies? Less than half. Less than half. And I'm well known. And I'm like, I'm an easy sale. I've already told you. Ask and
She
you
is
shall
an easy
receive.
sale. By the way, she's an easy sale. Just letting you guys know. If you're ever wondering, she's an easy sale. I'm getting a dirty look. She's not talking, so the camera's not flipping over to her, but I'm getting a very dirty look right now. But I'm just saying, when you grow up and, you know, it's like, who would you rather talk to try and get your ice cream, mom or dad? I mean, I'll just
Well,
leave it there.
the point is, it is very easy to make a suggestion and to phrase the suggestion in a way that people will consider it favorably. And think about it. By asking one egg or two, they literally had created such a demand in the egg business that they ran out of eggs. That's an amazing story. So we want to encourage you, listen to this again. If you're watching on YouTube, pay attention. Ben is an amazing person, and he's wonderful to listen to. We had a few tech issues because of, you know, tech is tech. But you will want to listen to every golden nugget that comes out of that man's mouth. So anyway, why don't you go ahead and close us out, Stephanie?
Well, thank you guys so much for spending your Friday afternoon with us. It means a lot to us that you choose to come and keep hanging out with us here on Black Belt Selling. We would not be doing what we're doing if it weren't for you guys constantly encouraging us with your listens, with your shares, with your interactions inside of our Facebook group, which happens to be at facebook.com/groups/Black Belt Selling. We really do appreciate you guys. But in the meantime, I do want to remind you, as always, you have absolute control over your life. Where you end up with your life is going to be 100% up to you. But you're the only person who can make the choice to take the actions, to put in the effort to make your life into what you want it to be. So go out there. And when I say make it a great week, I mean for you to make it a great week. I'm Stephanie, here for Anna. We are the Black Belt Sellers of Southwest and Central Texas. Make it a great week.